Alrighty. Hey, gang. Welcome back, you guys. Episode 45 of Stove Chat. And I'm Matt, as always. Welcome. Thanks for being here, you guys. As you know, we're here to talk about masonry stoves, rocket mass heaters, rocket stoves, all kinds of stuff like that. I've got a website, walkerstoves.com. It's listed in the description below, and I got some plans for sale there, and we're here to talk about how to build these things, how to burn them, how to live with them, all that. So thanks for being here, everybody. Really good to see you guys. Hope you guys are having a great week. Hope you guys are enjoying the summer. Looks like the gang is all here, as always. Really appreciate you guys being here. Belgian Gulch, Robin, Tall Shadow, hello. Thank you guys. So hope you guys are having a good day. I'm having a great day. I actually woke up early this morning and got a nice little surprise surf session. There's not usually much surf here down the street from me. Hey, Fred. All right. Same place as me, bro. Thanks for being here. So I surfed in the Salish Sea this morning, and it was awesome. There's not usually surf inside here in the summertime, but today and Monday, actually, I got some waves, so feeling stoked right now. Thanks, Jeremiah. Right back at you, bro. When I lived in Hawaii for a while, we used to always say chocolate bar instead of chocolate bra. But that's a funny little story there. So, Mark, welcome. All right, everybody. So, how you guys doing? You guys having a good summer? Hopefully, it's hot here. It's 85, which is really, really unusual for out here, kind of on the coast. So, hopefully, you guys are doing all right, not burning up. It's been a really nice summer so far. I haven't had. I don't want to jinx it, but we've just had clear sky. All blue, no aromas, nothing. So I don't know how the folks of you guys east of me are doing. Belgian Gulch, I imagine you've got a little particulate in the air, perhaps, looking at the maps and stuff. But we've been really fortunate. With that good fortune comes onshore wind from the coast, which means it's been not much surf and kind of like foggy and socked in down on the water and kind of cold, which has been nice. I mean, actually, it's been below 50 at night and barely 70 most days, so because of the fog. Maybe a little bit more than that, actually. We've had some okay weather. Anyways, I'm rambling. I'm just kind of cruising along here. So hope you guys are all doing good. So anyways, we're here not to talk about the weather and surfing, but to talk about masonry heaters and stoves and things like the Walker tiny masonry cook stove there behind me. And so one of the main reasons I'm here, as you guys know, is to answer questions for folks who are building these or thinking of building them. So if there's anyone here who has questions or topics of discussion, by all means, jump in anytime, throw them in the chat. That's really the purpose of this. I usually try and come up with something to keep the show going, to fill the time, but really it's, the intention is for it to be a two-way street, and I'd love for you guys to throw in any discussion topics or questions or anything you guys would like to talk about. Now, that said, I got some great stuff to go over today already, but like I said, I'd love to see questions and stuff come in through the chat. So it looks like you guys are kind of warm out there, Jeremiah. I figured you were. I know the middle of the country kind of gets like that 98 degrees and 99.9% humidity. And then Belgian Gulch, just as I figured, you got a 21,000 acre fire 15 miles east. I mean, at least it's to your east, I guess. Hopefully the prevailing winds are going west to east. But man, that's really close, my friend. You guys stay safe, all right? I'm sure you probably got your forest raked out there, as they say. So I imagine you've got a fire break and you're probably all prepared, but I know you're in a spot that's, you got potential for that. So Augustus, thanks for being here. Yeah, and you're welcome for doing the videos, man. I really enjoy our time here too. So regarding the videos and the schedule, I dove back in this year. I dove in a little early for a couple reasons. One, just because I know people are building right now. I've gotten a lot of business lately and a lot of questions. And I know, it's go time for people who've been putting up a structure. They're starting to dry it in and get it ready to go. But another reason is that I'm going to hopefully be traveling this winter. We'll see, I guess. But wasn't able to do that last winter. And so I'm going to try to do these weekly, out into the fall, probably hopefully up to November or so. And then I'll probably taper off and maybe go travel. And I'll try and catch up with you guys when I'm traveling. Maybe do them once a month or something from the van or South America or wherever I end up. But I don't really have a plan. Not surprising. But I'll try and stay with you guys. So, but I really appreciate being appreciated. So thanks, Augustus. That's really nice. And Robin says we're cooler than fire here. And Dennis is 46 and Homer. Right on, Dennis. That's awesome. I'm stoked to hear. You must have fog. I would imagine for it to be that cool up there. So love your town, Dennis. Nice place there. Spent some time up there working on boats, building boats, driving boats, fishing on boats, long lining. What else have I done up there? All kinds of stuff. So, lovely spot. So, all right, you guys, I'll just dive in with what I had prepared for today. And like I said, if you guys have questions or topics of discussion, please do jump in. But what I wanted to go over today, I spent some time, and this kind of was all spurred. Thank you, Tall Shadow, by the way. Appreciate it. This was all spurred by the question that we covered last week, which was, is it a masonry stove? Is it a rocket stove? Is it a rocket mass heater? Whatever. And we kind of dove into that a little bit. I'm sure I got sidetracked, but the general gist of it was, as we answered, they're all masonry heaters because they fit the definition. And we went over that last week, but it was something of a certain pounds of mass. 1,800 pounds or something is what they said. And with the intention to burn a hot, fast fire with the intention of burning clean and then store that heat in masonry or thermal storage of some description. A masonry heater would be masonry. There's obviously other ways to do thermal storage like water. So that was the question that kind of spurred this. But what I really started thinking about going back and we talked about a little bit the history of the masonry heaters is that there was, our modern history, such that separates what we're doing now from the traditional masonry heaters is that we've now just advanced to the combustion aspect because we have access to modern testing equipment where we can actually measure, down to the nth degree, the particulate and the emissions from our stoves. We're now able to tune the combustion aspect of these masonry heaters to a level that's never really been possible before. And that's really the key difference, is really the technology that we have to collect data has allowed us to improve things to where we are currently. And I think that's happened just in the last couple decades, really. And so that's what's different about our rocket mass heater and our rocket mass masonry heaters and our rocket mass, our rocket cook stoves as they were, masonry cook stoves. Now, I don't usually incorporate the word rocket into mine because it does tend to confuse people, but hopefully people come to us through the rocket stove world and they realize that we are using, this advanced combustion technique. And like I said, it's really the measurement that's allowed us to advance them further in these last few decades. There's always been, the right ideas, I think, have always been present in the masonry heater community with regards to trying to have a hot, fast fire with very clean emissions, very low emissions, very, high efficiency, and then to capture as much of that heat as possible in the masonry or in the thermal storage, again, to try and increase efficiency. And they just didn't have great ways to measure those things. They could measure temperatures and weights, so they could do efficiency fairly well, but they couldn't really measure what was remaining in the flue gases. Not very, a long time ago, not at all, and even 30 or 40 years ago, not very effectively. If you go to like the MHA, the Masonry Heater Association site, or look at some of Norbert Senf's stuff, who's been a real pillar of the measurement community for decades. The old ways that they had of measuring these things were pretty primitive, and so we're just getting some really good data, and it's allowed us to really push things forward. So what's different now with these masonry heaters is that we're burning just exceptionally clean compared to the majority of masonry heaters that came before us. Now, that's not to say that there were no clean ones. They're just, they might have gotten lucky, or there may have been some good designs, but like I say, they couldn't really measure, so they didn't really know. Now, with that said, that got me interested in going farther back, and so I did some research into kind of the history of masonry heating overall. And this also dovetails with a question that I got actually last year from one of my favorite customers and I'll say friends, who is a viewer from Japan who has done some lovely builds in Japan, and I believe I shared some last year. But at the time, he was asking about the heating systems in Japan, and he had, I believe he had just heard of whether it was the Korean ondol or the Chinese kang, I'm not sure, but he had kind of asked me about that. And at any rate, the gist of this story is that there's a long tradition in, Asia, I guess, of masonry heaters. And so I think that the history, at least the history that we know of for these heaters, really starts in Asia. And I couldn't determine from my research whether it was in what is present-day China or what is present-day Korea. But in both cultures, there are traditional masonry stoves. Now in China, it's called the kang, and very similar to a Roman hypocaust, if you're familiar with that. The gist of it is that there's a firebox, usually outside of the room, and then the room is built with a suspended floor of masonry built over a passageway of channels. Now, I'm just kind of paraphrasing, but I can actually quote the Wikipedia here. The first type of known heated platform appearing in the modern-day northeast of China used single flue systems found in the hypocaust of ancient Rome and the ondol of Korea. So they are all fairly similar, meaning they just had single passageway underneath. And they talk about finding them back to the 1st century. They found one, at least, back to the 1st century, which I assume is unearthed in 1st century building remains. So 1st century AD, it looks like. But there's another version that they called the, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, Huoqiang, which they found evidence of going back 7,200 years for these evidence of these early masonry heaters. And really it was as simple a concept as you would imagine. It sounds like it was really just a big fire on the floor, but with the intention of heating the floor. And then they would sweep the ashes and sleep on the warm floor. And there's an ancient poem, it sounds like, and it says, "No fuel to heat the floor to sleep, standing and crying with cold at midnight instead." So really interesting that they started, almost 10,000 years ago. So these are Neolithic masonry heaters. And they start with just burning on the floor. But then they, like I say, they clean it off, and they're really heating that mass, and then they're able to stay warm through the night without sleeping in the fire. And then they move on to these single flue heated platforms. And really interesting. So it sounds like they used fired clay. They'd use stones to support the bottom, and then fired clay plates across the top to form the flue. Now it says, there's an ancient text that has a few line drawings of kangs, and it says that the kang traditionally would be used to cook the meals and heat the room. So in the images they show here, they actually show what looks a lot like our cook stoves at the front end at the burn chamber. So they would have a fire down low and a brick constructed unit that was allowing them to cook over the top of it. Let's see if I can get you guys an image here. That one doesn't have an image. And then from there, the gases would go under the floor. So really similar to what we're doing here. And it sounds like, at least a couple thousand years ago, they were starting to work out this system. Now, one of the things I found really interesting about this, and I'm not sure I'm able to find the reference, but they talked about covering the top of it with the tiles, but then they mentioned that they cover that with, and they basically said cob, but they cover it with a clay sand mixture is what it sounded like. And so they're already using cob in these stoves, a long time ago. Now there's another advancement in that time. They say, we talked about the first known one, and then it says heated walls with a double flue system was found in a 4th century ancient palace. It has an L-shaped adobe bench with a double flue system. So how about that? So in the 4th century, which someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not real good at this history stuff, but 4th century, I'm assuming they mean they're using Judeo-Christian 4th century AD. I'm not sure. But anyways, but at this point now they've moved, it's like 300 years past the first single flue, and now we've got double flue, so we've got a circuit like we do in a lot of rocket mass heaters, and it's traditional Yanto rocket mass heater. And they also have an L-shaped bench, and they have heated walls. So super cool, right? Belgian Gulch, way cool. I mean, I love it. I just got so stoked when I was reading this. So I find that really interesting that they're progressing, and that it's really becoming, at this point it's been hundreds of years, if not thousands, if we're going back to that 7,000-year-old example in the cave. I just find it really interesting that they're progressing and really incorporating it into the culture. And then there's some literary evidence here that says in the Guanji Temple, there's a grand lecture hall. It is very high and wide to accommodate 1,000 monks. The platform of the hall was constructed with stones arranged as a network of channels, and the floor was finished with a coat of clay. That was where I read that. So I'll read that again. The platform of the hall was constructed with stones arranged as a network of channels, and the floor was finished with a coat of clay. Fires are set at outdoor openings at the 4 sides of the platform, while the heat flows inwards, warming the entire hall. So how about that? A hall big enough, a giant lecture hall big enough to hold 1,000 people, and underneath, and that sounds very similar to Roman hypocaust, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is prior, and I could have it wrong that this is prior, but we'll move from China here, and there it goes a little farther, but that's kind of the gist of it. So from China we go to Korea, and I'm going to assume that this is sort of evolved from kind of the same place, lighting the fires on the floor and then sweeping it out of the cave and having the warm floor. But it's essentially the same as the Korean construction. It's stones underneath and clay plates over the top. And in Korea, it's called the ondol. But in Korea, there's an archaeological site. This is in what's present-day North Korea. Another Neolithic age archaeological site from 5,000 BC, so 7,000 years ago. And they show a clear vestige of the Gyudyal, which is the... let me make sure I'm saying this right. Right, early ondols began as the Gyudyal, I don't know how to say that provided the heating for the home and cooking. And so again, at the front end, there's a big firebox with a cooking facility on top, place to put pots over the fire, and then the fire is sucked under the floor into the stove. And I think I might be able to show you this. Let's just try. Oh, not that one. How about that one? Yeah, there we go. So they got this little example here. And as you can see, they build a fire in front of the firebox here, and here's a pot suspended down. It almost looks like an industrial style, a Wieniawski industrial rocket where the pot is down into the combustion area almost. And then the flue gases are drawn under the floor, which is, again, made of a series of tiles covered with clay, and drawn to a chimney at the end. So, nothing new, but 7,000 years ago. 7,000 years ago, they found one of those. So, we found, examples from 7,000 years ago. And, that's what we found. So who knows how much longer, there's proof going back that far. So we're working with some pretty old technology here, my friends. Pretty old technology. And I just, I really, really, really am attracted to these ancient stories because I think that there's a lot for us to learn there with regards to materials in general. Like, for instance, here they talk about the heated floor supported by stone piers or baffles to distribute the smoke is covered by stone slabs, clay, and an impervious layer such as oiled paper. So how about that? So now in Korea, they've been doing it for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and they're a little more advanced than the ones we saw in China, because now the ones in China were, it even mentioned leaking carbon dioxide and whatnot into the room, whereas these now they're starting to incorporate a sealed layer, which, wonderful, right? Really cool, really interesting, and like I said, really, something that we can probably learn from there. So pretty neat. One of the things I liked about this was that they talked about the way they combusted, the way the burn was in these, and it sounds like for the most part they really weren't that clued in to burning hot and fast. So they were burning rice paddy straws, agricultural crop waste, or biomass of any kind for short-term cooking. And then it does sound like they would get some regular firewood for longer burns. But just looking at the images, it just looks, they have low chimneys. It doesn't look like they have a lot of draw, and there's a lot of smoke residue in around them. So it looks like they don't burn that well. It's interesting though. They say the fuel was sporadically burned 2 to 5 times a day, depending on the frequency of cooking. So it's interesting. They're identifying our different burn pattern than a traditional box stove already. And it does mention that the famous American architect Frank Lloyd Wright was building a hotel in Japan and was invited to a Japanese family's house, and the homeowner had experienced the Andal in Korea and had built one in his home, and apparently Wright was so impressed that he invented radiant floor heating using hot water, which he then incorporated into later buildings that he built. It says citation needed, so that may or may not be accurate, but legend has it that Frank Lloyd Wright invented radiant heating after experience with a heated floor from a masonry heater. So pretty cool stuff, right? I thought that was super interesting. So Jeremiah Shine says there's a Vedic story about Krishna stove attached to three stacked boulders in India. Praveen Mohan did a video about it. Very cool. That's awesome. Huh. And that is some ancient text. So that's really what I love to hear about is the sort of the antiquity of the methods. I mean, of course, it makes sense. We've been burning fire for literally millions of years. We've been living with fire, and I'm sure we were heating stones and laying on the warm ground and taking the stones to bed with us and all that. But it's just really interesting to see this evidence both in literature and in archaeological records. So the fact that they've found builds from 7,200 years ago or whatever it was, to me implies that it's been going on for much longer. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this history is because when we talk about these stoves, we typically talk about them from a European culture standpoint, right? We talk about, and European's probably not accurate because we do incorporate Russian stoves, but we talk about masonry heaters, and we talk about the European tradition of this long tradition of these big masonry heaters, and of course with European history, long history in this sense is really only 1,000 years or maybe a little more. Now we do go back a little farther, right? Because we do go back to the Roman hypocaust, which is a really famous example. It's very, very much like the Andal and like the Kang. Hopefully you guys can still hear me, but at any rate, talking about the hypocausts, and that's another old example, and we can probably bet that this technology, I would guess, came from Asia originally, that at least that we can see, and then was adopted a little bit farther west in Rome, and then I'm assuming moved through Europe during the Middle Ages. I'm just guessing. That part I don't know, and I couldn't find any history there. So Tall Shadow says, I saw a recent video of a Korean Andal being built by a modern company and saw a lot of smoke, and their firebox looked like a typical box stove. Seems like they need to attend a stove chat. Yeah, it's really interesting, Tall Shadow, because even the masonry heater world, you know, the guys at the Masonry Heater Association, everything else, if you can go back through their minutes and whatever, it's like 2 decades ago, 15 years ago, like I said, there's guys like Norbert Sanf and you know, there's a part of that movement who are really pushing for better combustion right out of the firebox. You know, they kind of worked out the back end, how to extract most of the heat from a burn, but they really were just kind of narrowing in on the fact that, hey, we really can get these things to burn cleaner if we try. We should try. You know, it's kind of, that's really kind of where it starts, is people just sort of going, oh yeah, this part's not burning that clean, we can do better. And like I said, Norbert Sanf and a few of the other guys were really geared up to it, but sort of the culture as a whole of masonry heaters was kind of one of like, they didn't even think about that. They were really just like, how cool is the exhaust, the smoke, because it was smoky, and how, you know, what's the air temperature, and that's how much efficiency we're getting, and that's kind of all they really thought about. So yeah, Tall Shadow, it's interesting to see these traditional designers, these traditional builders. A lot of them really haven't grasped that in this modern world we can use these traditional technologies and these traditional ideas, the idea of combusting and then extracting the heat from the flue gas into masonry that we are contacting, you know, that makes the central piece of our house, whether it's the floor or a bench or a cook stove or whatever. You know, they get all that, but then they just don't bother to go, oh, but we can improve the front end without really changing the fundamental nature and advantages and all that of this traditional technology. So really interesting. So Jeremiah says, I see these ancient foundations uncovered and definitely can see the fire chamber and exhaust path in some of them. Yeah, and that's exactly it. A lot of these images, you'll see a lot of that, especially in those traditional, you know, areas. So Tall Shadow says this company talked a lot about keeping the Andal traditional, but missing the cleanliness is also a major importance. Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying though, is that I really believe that well, I mean, I guess it's hard for me to speak to someone else's culture, but I would argue that you know, that a modern Andal, just like a modern masonry stove, like a Tula Kiwi built on a really modern combustion core, is still, you know, just as traditional as one that was built 500 years ago or whatever, but much less refined with regards to the firebox. You know, I don't see. I know it's not your point, Tall Shadow. I'm just sort of addressing that mindset. Is that, you know, I really feel like those guys could embrace those traditional construction methods while still just making some probably pretty modest changes to the firebox and draft situation and stuff like that, and, you know, just improve things exponentially. And of course, one of the big issues with these underfloor ones is if you don't have good draft, and if they are dirty and smoky and you're extracting all the heat, you know, it's possible you could create a situation where you are just capturing all that you know, gases with a smoky front end. You could be, basically what I'm trying to say is you could be endangering your life. You know, not like you're going to die probably, but just breathing a lot of particulate and a lot of stuff overall. So when Jeremiah says, yeah, it's silly that they're still doing that, especially when they have us right here, right now. Right? Cheers, my friend. Exactly. So anyways, I just love this stuff though. It's super fascinating, and it's really interesting, Tall Shadow, to hear about the modern companies doing it, and I get it, especially, you know, and people, you know, of the culture really embracing, you know, embracing their tradition and their culture. I can see it, but boy, just a little hybridization, because it's not like we need to plug anything in or attach a computer to it. It's just ideally, you know, just a few little tweaks, because we can tell the difference now. But at any rate, let's move on to the next one. So yeah, Belgian Gulch short freeze-ups. I keep getting some little errors saying that it's coming in and out. I'm still on Starlink, and it's been working pretty good. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed that it keeps going. But I know it's been dropping it. But as long as it comes back and you guys can hear me, Robin says it's minor there. So okay, I'm just gonna keep going, you guys, and If I disappear, I apologize. So at any rate, so that's kind of the ancient history as far as I could tell, and then we get into the hypocaust, which these are just so cool. So here is a hypocaust under the floor in a Roman villa near Caen, France. So, I mean, look at that. It looks like a rocket mass heater, right? Like it looks like exactly like ours. It just boggles my mind. So that that it's like exactly what we do, right? Like brick towers. They got some stone slabs here. It looks like they were quarried. It looks just exactly like the flagstone that's on mine. It's the same color and everything. It's possible they baked that these were like fired clay pieces, but I think they're stone, being that there's such a large span going across the top of those. And then it looks like what they did is they actually just made a gravel bed over the top of it. So really, really fascinating to me. And they talk about it here. The earliest reference to such a system is 350 BC. It suggests that the temple of Ephesus in 350 BC was heated in this manner, although Vitruvius attributes its invention to Sergius Orata in 80 BC. So we have references to it from about 350 years before Christ, and then someone talking about it being invented about 80 years before Christ. So at some point, around 2,000 years ago, the Romans invented this technology. Now, it looks so similar to those kangs and ondols that have been around at this point now for thousands of years in Asia. And the ancient Greeks. Oh, I said they were Roman. I was mistaken. They were ancient Greek. Oh no, here it is Roman. So I see. The word derives from ancient Greek. But it does sound like it was Roman. Yeah. So the ruins of hypocaust have been found throughout Europe. For example, in Italy, England, Spain, France, Switzerland, and Germany, and in Africa as well. So this is probably where we're starting to see the spread. Now, I'm going to speculate, like I said before, that they found this in Asia, that this traveled to them, or someone went there or whatever. So, I think this is the beginning, really, of the real spread and the beginning of the European version of the masonry heaters, but I'm not sure about that. There's this same person describes the construction operation in his work De Architectura in about 15 BC, and he's including details about how fuel can be conserved by building. And he goes on to just talk about the layout of the structure, not the stove itself. And he describes a device for adjusting the heat by a bronze ventilator in the dome ceiling. And these are really in the baths. So pretty interesting. And Jeremiah says, we can't forget the industry has guided people into forgetting many things, and the current paradigm still thinks dirt is dirty. Yeah, it's a good point, Jeremiah. People haven't had any, at least in this country, up until the last few decades, there weren't anything other than box stoves, unless you were really of the, really upper crust, and there are some real high-end masonry heaters out there in real fancy neighborhoods from a long time ago, but they're pretty rare in this country. And so Tall Shadow says, I guess this would be a great place to have a 10-inch batch to heat all that floor. And I think that's the gist of it, is that they were huge. And Jeremiah says 12, and then the guys are going for 13. But, if you look at, for instance, this image here, of the size of the opening here, the size of the flue space here, that's only going to be probably stratified up at the top. But these are big. I mean, I imagine they were running huge fires. Now, again, they weren't very well designed in terms of combustion. So so yeah, size I don't know, but these were huge in terms of firebox and flue size in general, I would think. So let's see. Let's see, where am I? Oh, did I lose it? I am flipping all over here. There it is. So I just want to take a few more of those. So yeah, Jeremiah says, I knew a rich guy that heated his basement Olympic-sized pool and mansion with a boiler he loaded with a forklift. And yeah, that's, there's actually, those big forklift boilers are pretty common in the Midwest, right? That's one of the things we really want to kind of get away from if we can, because the people usually don't have dry wood they're loading those forklift, but they do. But your point is well taken. I know when I was young, I was probably 20 or something, so 30 years ago, a friend of mine, his family had done well in the cable TV business, and so his father built a custom home in Sun Valley, and I went to go visit them one time, and the center of the home was, as big as my house, a giant structure of masonry. I wasn't aware enough. I kind of was clued into it. I knew what it was. We looked at it. I thought it was super cool, but I just wanted to go snowboarding, so I didn't pay that much attention. But it was enormous, and I don't remember. I'm gonna just make something up, but it was. I've talked now to many East Coast, masonry heater builders who work in this kind of venue, and they build those before the house is built, and they're usually, a fraction of the price of the house, but a large percentage, not a large percentage, but like, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. Literally. So, because they make the central core of the house and all that. But at any rate, the point is that those didn't exist for most folks, going back so far. So anyways, here is another one in Spain, another Hypocaust. I love these, and I think, there's a lot of inspiration to be found in these. For instance, look at, well, of course, the lovely mosaic, at the Roman Villa here is just gorgeous. But more than that, if you kind of look at the Robin, that's funny. Pictures are representing many slaves working hard to keep the upper crust warm, and she says, I'm bringing it to the rescue. Well, thank you, Robin. That's the gist of it, is that this kind of thing, heating like this is a lot of work, and to do it on a public scale, obviously it was massive slave power keeping these things running all the time, but it can be adapted to a sort of simple, holistic, as it were, lifestyle, for people like us who are willing to put in the effort. And it does take some effort. You got to go harvest your wood and get it drying and seasoned. You got to build the dang thing and keep it fed and all that. But there is so much reward out of it. But at any rate, inspiration. Look at the inspiration here. Belgian Gulch, I think I got an idea for your barbecue area floor, bud. You better get to work. I look at this and I instantly want to go start stacking bricks outside. I'm just like, well, why haven't I done that yet? That just looks so cool. But more than just inspiration for like building a heated floor, just look at this first, like, potential bench top build. What they've done here, it looks like, is they've used, I'm going to guess they used cement. And they've got these red tiles that formed the top, and then they actually poured like a 3-inch, it looks like, I'm just guessing, layer over the top of it. So how much thermal mass did they have there? Just a ton. This must have been just delightful to walk on, right? I would have imagined. So here's a picture showing sort of the structure of Hypocaust. This is from the Roman baths at Bath in Britain. And I'm not clear on my timeline on these, so I'm just going to kind of give them all a rough, like, 2,000 years ago. But those of you who are history buffs can correct me. I think it's probably within the range of those. So Jeremiah says you need a dose of Pesco La Scala. I do. You know what? I haven't. Is he still? I haven't. I watched some of his videos like 5 years ago, whatever. He was doing the little metal boxes. And of course, I'm not a big fan of metal boxes, but I liked the way he used his brain. He had a really cool style of iterating builds and doing stuff. But man, I should go check it out, see if he's still doing stuff. I do need to get a dose of that. I like that guy. But at any rate, look at that. 2,000 years ago, look at these guys going with their hypocausts and their giant, the size of those flue passages are huge, right? So we know that they're burning a lot of wood, and we know that these are large systems. This is definitely like a 13-inch system. So very cool. Fred says could be used potentially as a floor for a sauna. A small one would not nearly be time-consuming or as expensive. Yeah, exactly right, Fred. I think it would be amazing for a small sauna. So, of course, those were baths. In the Roman area, they used them often in the baths. So from there, we kind of move around here. The Russian stove listing here in Wikipedia is kind of funky. They refer to the Russian stove. I think we've sort of bastardized the word these days, because now we talk about the Russian stove as kind of being any masonry heater, but here they say it's sort of a specific, unique type that first appears in the 15th century, so not that old, used for both cooking and domestic heating, and a typical one kind of looks like a masonry cook stove, kind of like what we are used to seeing here. Here it is. Here it's got kind of a normal firebox. It's got a cooking area above it, and it does have a big wall of masonry around it. Here's a good example that we can really see. So not really the detailed chambers and channels and stuff like that we see in the other European stoves. But what's important about these is that they do incorporate mass, and it does say they do retain heat for a long time, and besides its use for domestic heating in winter, people may sleep on top of the stove. In the large thermal mass, a proper Russian stove weighs about 2 tons, and layered design, in many variants, the hot flue is separated from the outer brick shell with a layer of sand or pebbles, ensure that the outer stove is safe to the touch. So they would do layers, and they would put in between the layers, they'd put sand or pebbles. And as we know from Paul Wheaton's experiments, pebbles are a great insulator, not very good mass. But that meant that they had an outer skin that was safe to touch and yet still had a long heating cycle. So really interesting, the differences in the way people use these. The Russians would just get up on top of there and just sleep up high instead of trying to build it down low. They were like, why build it down low? We'll just get up there. So pretty interesting. So there are some foods that were believed to acquire distinctive character. The process of cooking can be called languor. I don't know why they use that term, but they're basically slow cooking. It says holding dishes for a long period of time at a steady temperature. And anyone who has built my tiny masonry stove or my barbecue brick oven, or just you guys have heard me talk, it's one of the things I talk about all the time, is the steady temperature that you can hold foods at for a long time. That gives you a really unique way to cook. So, they talk about here how they attain that special character, and blah, blah, blah. They're talking about special tools and things like that to get the bread out, and blah, blah, blah. And as well as warming, cooking, a Russian stove can be used for washing. A grown man can easily fit inside. So I don't really understand what they're saying there. They used to treat winter diseases by warming a sick person's body inside the stove? Huh. I don't know what they mean exactly. If they mean they actually climbed in maybe they swept the fire out and then they would just sit in the warm firebox? I don't know. Huh. Really interesting. So anyways, from there we go to the masonry heater entry. And in the masonry heater entry in Wikipedia is actually a little disappointing, because while they describe the masonry heaters very well, the only examples that they show are tile stoves. And in my opinion, tile stoves or Kachelofens or any of the other names for these traditional stoves are a certain type of masonry heater. And they were very traditional in both Europe and Eastern Europe, and Northern Europe, and sort of all over. But a lot of the modern masonry heaters really don't use tiles very often, mostly because they're so expensive. They were always basically custom built for each individual stove. And so we don't see them with tiles very often, but in the Wikipedia masonry heater entry, that's kind of all they have. So we'll just kind of go through here and look at some of these images, and then we'll go to Google maybe and look at what it passes for a modern version. But I think these are really interesting. These are, masonry heaters. They're usually built out of fire brick inside. They usually have a host of channels. At this point, we're now getting into typically up and down channels within these stoves, used to heat the inside. And then again, the tile, there'll be a little layer of insulation before the tiles. And again, the idea being to keep the tiles at a reasonable temperature. So there's a really fancy Kasselofen built in a palace in 1720. So, no expense spared. And then this is what they call a modern masonry heater. And, that doesn't really give a really good example, does it? It's just like a fireplace that probably has some, they might have built some channels and some masonry mass within that, but that isn't what we picture when we say masonry heater. But at any rate, these tiled stoves are very cool. So it says the use of tiled stoves likely originated in the Alps in the late 13th century. So late 1200s. So I guess what's that? Is that like the Dark Ages? Or no, that'd be earlier. Yeah, so whatever, 800 years ago, something like that, they started to build these tile stoves. And the idea developed from a simple clay dome to an ornate tower-like structure. And open fireplaces were replaced when the tiled stove became artistically integrated into both the architecture and fittings of the rooms of palaces, castles, convents, and monasteries. So very neat. So we went from kind of a rough, clay dome to starting to build these tiles and starting to incorporate them into the home. So let me catch up with you guys in chat there. Fred Jackson says David Lyle's book shows many flue paths. Yeah, there are some great references. I'm not really going too far into the details right now. We're just kind of doing an overview. But yeah, there's some really interesting views of flue paths, and there's some different, ideas about what works for flue paths, and of course what you do in the front, combustion core and chimney. Those all impact what you can do inside, with the channels. But very interesting to see the different styles, and I have David's book, and it does a really nice job. Jeremiah says Survival Russia has a nice tour of a Russian country home, and the stove is in disrepair, and the structure is very clear. Oh, that's cool. I might need to go check that out. That sounds really neat. So here's a 16th century oven, and it looks like it was badly damaged by Swedish forces in 1645. So how about that? So much history. But very cool. Now this is actually a stove. I think the firebox is maybe here, but that's a tile Kasselofen. So at some point they kind of started to get a little whimsical, and it looks like this is much more for decoration really than heat. I don't know how much heat you'd get out of that or how much weight it has. But interesting. There's, more traditional tiles. That one's in Latvia. And again, some more of these. So we're starting to see these sort of, like this one's in Poland. These real fancy tile stoves. But like I said, this is the masonry heater Wikipedia, and it's really just doing these tile stoves. Here's an interesting view of a tile stove. Now this is really typical for how they're built these days. They have a very normal fire brick construction on the inside, much like what we do. And then they simply, I shouldn't say that, some masterful artist with great care and difficulty and skill builds these custom tile outers that go around the stove. Now there's typically airspace and channels and passageways in between, sometimes insulated, sometimes not. It really depends on the layout. But really, really beautiful pieces. I've always thought it would be amazing to build one. My neighbor is a potter, and sometimes I think about hitting him up for the you made me laugh, Jeremiah, for the hitting him up for, to do some of this, but it'd be a lot of work. But I've also, covering just the bricks of the tiny masonry heater behind me there, that's a great way to go. Even just a primitive style of just sticking them right onto the bricks. It just makes such a lovely finish. So really interesting way to go. Jeremiah says the door's for the dough, talking about the door on the little woman figure stove. That's pretty interesting. That would be a cool little bread oven. So we're getting to just these tile stoves. But let's kick out of here because, like I said, we're not going to get much different. And let me just go to... oops, I did that wrong. Sorry about that. There. Okay. So this is more what we picture when we think of a modern masonry heater. They're often brick. They're actually often double-skinned, simply because they're trying to get so much mass in there, and simply because they're usually using really, this one's just brick on the outside, but often they'll have really fancy finishes on the outside. And by doing double skin, as we've talked about on this show many times, gives you a little more leeway with what you can use and get away with, and keeps the outer skin and much more stable, and allows you to use just finish to a higher level, I should say. So as we go through here, you'll see there's a few examples of brick ones. That one's lovely. But these are your typical masonry heaters, and now we're getting into more what I sort of envision as really the modern masonry heater, at the non-DIY level, right? At the custom home level, I guess you'd say. This thing is probably on the order of $20,000 or something. But these are gorgeous. It's beautiful. So that's a Tula Kiwi. Maybe it's $30,000, knowing it's Tula Kiwi, and that's probably mostly soapstone. But they're gorgeous. And this is what I think of when I think of a modern masonry heater. So I think that that these really do represent sort of that continued progression forward, from what we've witnessed here to these. Now, as I mentioned, the difference really is that for the last, I don't know, like 100 years in this country, they've been building into this is a great example that's on the screen right now, these really massive masonry builds, like the one I saw in my friend's home, which was, by the way, much larger than this. I mean, it literally was like a giant wall of the house, and 2 stories tall, 20 feet wide. I couldn't see around it. It was an enormous structure. So I think that they've been building them bigger and bigger and bigger, and building these, huge, expensive structures. And the technology has gone into the channels inside and all that. But as we started talking about, you'll notice they still have pretty much a giant kind of fireplace firebox. Now, they all love that because it provides a really nice visual, and they get these really, really spectacular fires. In this image, you can see that fire is it's just raging. But what they've typically missed is the pure efficiency. We've really moved forward in the last few decades, as I mentioned before, with these combustion cores. Now, there's some people who are in the masonry heater world that don't consider themselves in the rocket stove world, who have been paralleling the rocket stove world. And so there are other fireboxes other than just our rocket stove fireboxes that are clean. So there are masonry heaters like this that are clean now. So when I'm making these comments, I'm not talking about, everybody except for us or whatever. It's really just sort of the time and the progression that I'm referring to. But we've had this industry, as it were, these builds of these giant masonry heaters, and they really haven't had super clean front ends until the last few years. So that is really what I see as the progression of this thing that we're talking about, from those ancient Neolithic Asian rocket, masonry heaters, as it were, underfloor heating systems, to the Romans with their hypocausts, bringing that across the rest of Europe, and then refining those into tile stoves. And I think that those tile stoves really led to these, because the tile stoves were the first double skins, at least as far as I know, right? They have the brick interior, and then they build that beautiful outer. Well, that's exactly what's going on in these stoves, is a brick interior and these beautiful outer skins. And really, that's sort of the progression that's happened. And then now we're starting to address the combustion area. Now, as you guys know, how my stoves differ from, for instance, what's on the screen here is simple. My intention is to provide designs that are ultimately clean and efficient, but at the same time able to be built by an inexperienced do-it-yourselfer for a reasonable investment. And whether that's salvaging all your parts yourself and building the thing for a couple $100, or buying everything brand new and top dollar and still spending $2,000 or $3,000, it's a huge difference from something like we see on the screen here. That's probably, this one I'm looking at here, I'm guessing, a $40,000 professional build. There's a plinth underneath that going down to the, there's a huge foundation for this thing. There's a chimney all the way up through the roof of however big this facility is. There's probably more that's extending off the backside. I mean, this is just a massive professionally built masonry structure. So with regards to performance difference, I believe that our inexpensive DIY rocket mass masonry heaters are every bit the stove that this is. Now, we don't have as much mass, so it works at a different scale. But that's what we're for, right? Like, if you can build that house and you need that much heat, then hopefully you can afford to build that heater too. But really, if you're looking for, heating smaller spaces, investing less money, investing more of your own work and education, that's where what we're doing here really starts to make sense. So let me catch back up with chat there. And you guys are talking about Survival Rush's video, which sounds cool. Maybe he shows you the door for the dough. I don't know. I got a little confused. But Jeremiah says, I noticed soapstone dust is very cheap here. And what about using it with a bit of clay for mass? Yeah, Jeremiah, I think that would be awesome. That question I got last week, and all of a sudden I can't remember who sent it, and I apologize. It was Daniel. Dan asked about adding, I think it was basalt or something, and making his own bricks. And yeah, Jeremiah, absolutely. You add it to the clay, and you could just freeform it. You could make adobes, and you could probably make yourself some pretty wicked, heavy adobes. It's essentially going to be a low-fire ceramic, exactly. That's what you'd be building with, but low fire, high fire, for our application in most locations, it doesn't matter, at least not to me. And if a high fire finish is desired, well, we just showed you some great examples, right? You can use a low fire ceramic for the inside of the stove, for inside the body. You could build yourself a high density sand or soapstone, clay sand, whatever. Use the soapstone dust as the sand, probably. So it'd probably be clay, soapstone, adobes. But then you could tile the outside and give yourself a high fire finish. So there's a few ways around that. And and then Jeremiah says, sometimes I see the cross section of the Great Pyramid with the chambers and shafts and see a stove system. Man, I feel you, man. I get that all the time. I'm always looking at stuff and going, ooh, what if? I really like the Dakota fire pits and that kind of stuff. I find that those, just excavated stoves, as it were, are really fascinating. Anyways, Tall Shadow says, nice to have Walker Stoves and Dragon Tech as affordable places to go to bring all this history to your own home. Man, Tall Shadow, we're going to have to hire you to write copy for the marketing department here, bro. Nicely done. So with that said, you guys, that's an hour. So let's wrap it up here. At some point, I realize we're getting, and Dan Positive Aspect referred to this as well, we're getting a lot of knowledge built up in these past episodes, and there's not really a way to reference them. So I'm hoping to go back through those at some point and start to sort of organize these a bit. I might start to release snippets of them as videos that say things like cross-sectional area discussion or whatever, how to size your stove. Take those excerpts out of the stove chats and put them into small couple minute long videos and start to extract those so we can point other beginners to the useful sections without having to go through the whole chat. that's a pretty optimistic goal of mine, knowing how how much I've been getting done on this stuff lately. So I'm not sure if I'll really get around to it, but I would like to do that. And so if anyone has any input over the coming weeks, send me an email or whatever and say, hey, I was watching Stove Chat, there was a great section on this. You might think about making that available or whatever. So I will, I'm going to keep kind of chewing on that one and see if I can find a workflow that isn't too onerous. And if I can, I will try and start to compile that. But if anyone wants to dive in and help out, just help out by throwing me some pieces of what you thought was good, or something that helped you, or hey, that was a great section, let's try and remember that one. That'd be helpful. So all right, you guys, Jeremiah's talking about having a cornucopia of fire belching from the taproot hole of a spruce a while back. That's what I'm talking about, Jeremiah. That's you and I. You understand me, man. That's what I meant about excavating. So all right, you guys. I'm going to go on and enjoy this beautiful day. I hope you guys do the same. Have a great week, and I can't thank you guys enough for being here. If you're new, by all means, go check out my website, walkerstoves.com. Link in the description. We got some plans for sale there to help you build your own stove. It's a great place to get started. And, of course, this is a great place to come ask questions, and we'll do our best to help you out. So with that, I see your comment there, Mark. If you can get some granite dust, that might be worth playing with, especially if you got a build coming up. Definitely worthwhile. So with that, you guys, I will say adios, and I hope you guys have a great day. Where's my mouse? Have a great day and a great week, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 46. All right, you guys. See you next time.